It's time to talk music, audio gear, and anything else that crosses our minds. I'm Mark.
And I'm Peter.
And welcome to the Hurton Audio Podcast. So today I want to talk about something a little bit more general. And it's something that comes up like literally every day in music news, in everything. And that is, why is the album not dead, right? Because when you think about it, for the last 10, hell, even 15 years, music industry insiders, critics, everybody's been saying the album is going to die. And what is everybody talking about at the moment? They're talking about albums. Yes, people talk about singles, but more importantly, those singles are from albums the vast majority of the time.
And even if there's a breakout song that's a huge song, it's almost always followed by an album with that song on it. Like, it's trying to capitalize on the single. So it's like, the argument is like, yeah, you can say albums are going to die, but albums seem to be more popular than ever. I mean, even the concept album, I mean, this week we've got Eminem's new Slim Shady concept album, which I definitely butchered the name because I can't see it. But
oh, yeah, so I've just had it off the screen.
The death of Slim Shady?
Coup de Grace. Or Grace. Or
Grace.
Whatever.
It's definitely not Grass. It's Grace.
I don't know.
Has some really good songs on it. You know, it's like a return to the Slim Shady sort of sound. So I think it's like nice if you're an Eminem fan, or I mean, I think it's probably a lot more of the casual Eminem fans who's probably turned up. I imagine the really serious Eminem fans, it's like, wow, this is great. But a lot of people who sort of liked Eminem when he was really, really initially popular in that earlier or that mid bubble in his career, of like, then got interested again, which is really interesting. But the full thing around this is it is a concept album, and it's a long one. What was it, 19 songs?
Yeah.
Long concept album about one singular theme, really. I know it'll be broke up into sub-themes, but, you know, it's just a great example of, you would not expect that to happen if you really believed the music news hype and the, you know, like we're telling you this is the future, and you go, well, it isn't though. I mean, it's just not happening. So now I feel sorry for people who are just releasing single after single saying, well, I'm doing what everybody's telling me to do. And it's like, you might as well just put an album out, especially if you have the songs.
Yeah, and like, say we take One Republic's Artificial Paradise, for example. There's maybe 8 or 9 singles that have come out separately.
Over the space of like 2 years as well.
But then they're all on the album. So, you know, an industry sort of like mindset would be release 9 singles, right? Then just release an album with none of those singles on. People on streaming services don't care. It doesn't matter. They can go listen to the singles. Well, I'll tell you who do care. The people who buy CDs.
Yeah, and vinyl
and
as
vinyls.
Well. Definitely vinyl.
That's where this culture is happening. And I think it's really interesting because I love albums. I think the vast majority of people who love music love albums. Even if you don't listen to the albums in order, even if sometimes maybe 10% of your music listening is physical albums or even just going through the playlist, right? But when your favorite artist releases a new album and you get to go through the song list and look at the song names and you have no idea what any of the songs sound like, there's an initial hit of excitement that you can't beat with a single.
I mean, if you go into like the fan culture stuff, it's amazing to me, particularly with when I was briefly looking into One Republic, their new album, and also for Coldplay. This is always an ongoing thing with Coldplay, is people trying to sort of crack like the track listings before they come out. I mean, there was people who sort of figured out the album was called Artificial Paradise before it was announced by One Republic. And I always find that fascinating, that people dedicate so much time. But there's a lot of this stuff about songs being moved from album to album as well, which is really interesting, because the people were talking about some of the songs on Artificial Paradise was supposed to be on Human, which is One Republic's album before this one. And I just thought that was really interesting. But again, with the full COVID, we're sort of now out of COVID almost for the most part, primarily, depending on where you live. So you've got these bands that were like, these are the songs that we was going to release, and then because of the way the world was, they've chosen not to release them or to halt them releases. A lot of bands seem to have had these filler albums come in where it's been a completely different mood, or maybe of the moment album where they've recorded it really fast and said we can put this out because we're not doing anything, and we'll whatever we was gonna do, we'll let that come out later. So I think that's a really interesting point as well. But then even going back to Coldplay, the idea of double albums and sequel projects, that seems to be very commonplace at the moment as well, like tying into the full era thing of saying, look, this is a multiple album era, or this is like a singular album era, but it's going to be spread. And as we know as well, the K-pop artists are very good at doing these, like, they're doing EPs, but they're calling them mini albums, which is interesting in itself.
Yeah, in K-pop, it's very popular for them to relentlessly, and I mean relentlessly, release EP after EP after EP, and then they get first albums, but they're all, like, named first. So it's always like, say, for example, with aespa, it's aespa's first album, Armageddon. Do you know what I mean? That's the way it's listed on HMV. It's the way it's listed on Spotify sometimes.
Do you think that is to capitalise on metadata? Or maybe do you think it's to clarify? Because modern releases have gotten so messy.
And bloated. And where do you like, when you look at, say, because Twice have a lot of albums, like, and EPs and stuff. When you go on the albums tab, any EP with more than 7 songs appears as an album. So it's probably to do the metadata to go, okay, well, this is an EP with some remixes on, and this is an actual album.
Yeah.
So it's probably to do with that. But like I say, really, you would think that they wouldn't do that with K-pop.
No, because it seems like a very weird way to release, like, the album title, to call it all, like, you wouldn't say my first EP, would you? And then have a colon and have the name. So
can we just have a remembrance of ZZ Top's first album?
Well, I was thinking of that
came out in 1970. No, 19 like, well, it might have been 69 actually, but I don't know.
Queen also have a Queen's first EP, and it's a mixture of live and studio tracks, like a bootleg one.
Yeah, but like I said, that's just like one, like a slightly different sort of take on album releases. But the reason I wanted to talk about this today was, it's very interesting. Why is the album still a thing now? Obviously, with the resurgence of physical media like vinyl being very popular, that definitely gets a lot of the releases down to half an hour, because they're having to think, well, if we press this on vinyl, we want it to fit on 1 disc, or we've got to pay twice as much money to press it on 2 discs. So that's a factor. Now, some people like Muse, they'll just press their album on 4 discs because they just don't care. I imagine that's what One Republic would do with Artificial Paradise if they pressed it on vinyl. They'd just press it on as many discs as it took, because they know people will buy it, and at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter on the runtime. And this is why you sort of see like digital deluxes, and then the physical maybe has 1 or 2 less songs.
I almost think it's gone the other way. They want to print 4 sides of vinyl, 2 vinyl discs, because that's where the 180 gram half-speed ones are coming in.
Yeah, and it's more money to make on profit because they can charge slightly more. But the thing that I think is interesting about it is that's one side of it. Yes, you have vinyl is popular, but also what does everybody who makes music want to do? Make an album and make a physical record. Like, there may be a couple of like people like in pop that aren't as bothered about doing this. Obviously, not everybody's dream is to make an album, but for the vast majority of band situations, and for a lot of artists who have a favorite album, the first port of call, and there's a big thing, and they always talk about, you spend 10 years making your first album and 4 months making your second album, but like I say, it's just an interesting thing, because this is why the album's not dead, because people have a desire to make it. Most artists have a desire to make albums. So even people like BB Rexa or Ray, for example, said they wasn't allowed to release albums on their record contracts because they just wanted them to have single after single, but they wanted to release an album, and then they ended up ditching their deals or changing management or whatever so that they could release an album.
And I believe Ray said that she did have a full album, and it sort of basically got shelved.
And they shelved Kim Petras' album, Problematique, for no reason whatsoever, and then it came out anyway.
And I find it bizarre when it's shelved and then it does eventually surface, like a couple, maybe like a year or 2 out from the original date. But it comes into this numbers thing of like, well, you're not allowed to release, and this is something that sort of airs around in the music sort of gossip, is this idea that you're not allowed to release an album if you haven't got enough pre-saves or streams on the singles or whatever the metric is. And I think, well, surely the full idea is if you have built the product, it's like, well, what's the point in not putting it out? I mean, it's like we see a lot of games getting cancelled when they're literally about to ship, and you think,
what's the harm in just putting it out?
Yeah, and the thing is with music is, as Spotify's CEO tried to get everybody on, it's very cheap to make and distribute. I mean, you can do it with zero budget. Should you? No, not really, because a theoretical zero is implicating that you own like a 20 grand studio, which you have to own to do it.
Where the attempted argument is with Spotify CEO is if you have the facilities and the fan base, in theory, you can make your album for just your time and equipment. Right now, that is a very optimistic way of thinking about it, because even most independent musicians will have to buy their equipment. They'll have to spend a long period of time writing, mixing, blah blah blah,
honing the craft.
But also, you know, in theory, unless you're trying to do everything by yourself, which a lot of people are trying to do because they can't afford to pay anybody, is you still need artwork, you still need marketing. You know, if you're going to do it properly, if you're going to try and make money, and this is the angle with what he's sort of saying, is yes, you can do it on a zero budget theoretically because you don't have to pay anybody, but you still have to pay yourself. So if everybody did it on a zero budget, nobody would do it again.
Yeah,
because at the end of the day, when we're talking about zero budget albums going on Spotify and stuff, we're talking about people's like passion projects. So we're talking about mainly people's hobbies. It's the same as being able to say, you know, it doesn't cost Instagram any money. It doesn't cost the artists on Instagram any money to upload a picture or a portrait or a photograph. Well, yeah, but the camera costs money. The art supplies cost money. All
software. If they're using Adobe, that's a
time
joke.
Costs money. But their argument is, well, you're going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
It's a hobby. That's I think where he was trying to come from, but he butchered it, and I think a lot of people like me hate him for it. Yeah. So, you know, that doesn't help. But like I say, a lot of people on a zero budget, what's the first thing you're going to try and do? You and some friends, you're going to try and record an album. Even if it's well beyond you and you might only get an EP out of it, you're going to shoot for an album.
Well, the thing is with an album is it says, look, this is essentially Mark 1 of this project. This is like where this project starts. And then the album, I mean, it's synonymous in a lot of record keeping. When you look at Wikipedia or Discogs or anything like that as a defining period of an act. So like an album is like a check mark almost.
And you've got to remember, an album is like a way to create a product. Now, for a lot of people, it's very daunting to have just single after single after single. But also, if you're thinking, say, a band before the debut album, right? Well, how do you know which songs sound the same as each other? How do you know what you're shooting for? If you make 10 singles and they're all slightly different directions, they aren't going to compile very well into an album.
No, that's very true. And album mastering, I think I'd be very curious to hear this across indie acts more so. Because there's not been any album I've listened to where I've listened to it and gone, okay, none of that fits together. Like you say, sonically. It's not about the style, because a lot of albums are very multi-genre now. But sonically, you know, you don't have songs where one of them's like a completely different mastering spec to another, because it would sound horrible on an album if you had a super, super dynamic song and then a song that was brick-walled, but the songs didn't reflect that. Like, they're both just, you know, like mid-tempo, full band arrangements, similar style, but one of them super dynamic and the next one is absolutely slammed. Like, that would take you out of a release, because you'd be like, well, why do these sound so sonically different? And a lot of people wouldn't really be able to describe what was happening. They'd just be able to say, well, that one's louder than the other one. But it's not about loudness. It's about dynamics and perceived excitement.
The thing with an album is it's a way to round out a project with a deadline and an idea. So the reason a lot of albums end up coming out, or the reason a lot of projects turn into albums, is because it's a way to set like yourself a deadline or finish line. It's a way to say, right, we are done with this 2-year recording period and this is what we have to show for it. Whereas without the album, it's endless. There is no, like, what do you tour? Who tours a single?
Some
Genuinely,
people
think
try.
about it. Who have you ever seen anybody tour a single?
Sort of not really much of a thing. I mean, Motley Crue maybe. But I don't feel like Motley Crue will play their new songs as much.
No, they probably can't play them. I'm going to say, I know Motley Crue do get a lot of flack for their latest live performances.
It's like they're a band where they won't make an album because in the zeitgeist, they've been told they can't. Like, and they've sort of stuck with that. They've not really had a serious crack at an album since Saints of Los Angeles, which is a really cool album. So I think it's really sad because really there is some artists out there, particularly older artists who've sort of been around the block and don't really have anything left to prove, should I say, even though they're still trying to prove stuff. They're the artists that are not that keen on putting albums out. I mean, look at Guns N' Roses. I mean, it's just never going to happen. And I know, like, what is it? Next year, Slash said, is the year of Guns N' Roses. Does that mean we're finally going to get a Guns N' Roses album?
But they've been saying that for 10 years.
Well, that's the other thing, isn't it? Yeah. Well, they have been saying it for 10 years. It's like almost like it's too much pressure to actually commit to an album.
Has it been 14 years since Chinese Democracy came out?
2008 to...
Yeah, so we're very much at the point where this album is going to have taken longer to make than Chinese Democracy, which at one point was the longest sort of wind up for recording an album ever, because they just never got there, did they?
I think the reason why that sort of record was standing for Chinese Democracy is they didn't stop making that album.
Yeah.
Like, that album was a constant project, and then it just wasn't coming out.
But yeah, so that's part of it. So you have a few things, right? You have the way the project is handled. An album becomes the beneficial sort of vehicle, right? Because you can sum everything you've got together, put one piece of art behind it, and it makes more sense. All the songs can still come out as singles should you want them to. Or you need, say, 7. Well, that doesn't matter. You can have 7 singles, 7 music videos. Doesn't really matter. They're all still off the album. Except if somebody likes a lot of those songs, they can just go to a record shop and buy the album instead of having to buy 9 singles.
It also means, so take I Ain't Worried by One Republic, a song that was on Top Gun Maverick, a song that a lot of people casually will very much like, that maybe aren't One Republic fans. Say you really, really like that song, you're like, well, I want to hear what One Republic are doing. And I would love to hear them sort of in a similar vein of I Ain't Worried. Well, before this album dropped, you'd look and go, well, that's a single, and they've just got a chaotic amount of singles around it, and I don't really know where it fits. Do you know what I mean? Unless you just start listening to anything, and let's face it, the way that people listen, people's like habits, a lot of people won't just say, right, I'm just going to go from the top or the bottom and just start listening to this band. People be like, oh no, I won't bother.
Yeah, because how do you know which song sounds like I Ain't Worried without having it packaged on an album with other songs that are produced, mixed and mastered at the same time as that song, written at the same period with that band?
And even if the intent isn't to listen to more, well, you might listen to I Ain't Worried from the album, and then it might autoplay Red Light, Green Light after. And then you might say, oh, this is interesting, or, oh, I don't like that. But it then teases more from that act, whereas... depending on what streaming service you use, it may not jump back to One Republic. And even if it does, it might play a song like Apologise, which again is very, very different. And if you're a casual listener, you'll go, oh no, I know Apologise, and I'm not interested in it. Or I am interested in it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It won't put you on a path of discovery. Whereas an album will make you, you might stick around because it just starts also playing. And you think, oh, well, I'm going to see where this goes for a second.
I also think it's very interesting with the way albums go. You often have a few songs on an album that, for me, surpass the singles. Earlier on today, I was listening to She's American by the 1975, and I was just thinking, I know it technically did it get a single release or not? I don't think it did.
I don't think so, because it doesn't have a music video, does it?
No.
So then it's not a single.
So in my mind, it's not a single. But I'm just trying to remember, because they did their own neon art for every song on that project. Because obviously, like, the other thing with albums is, guess what? You have a visual art style that also correlates to the audio art style.
Yeah.
And this is why it's a full package thing. But like I say, She's American, one of the best songs by the 1975, right? For me, but it's not a single on that album. And I always think when you hear these songs, and there's always songs like this for almost everybody, when you listen to albums, you go, why is that song a single and this song not a single? When in, say, the listener's opinion, the non-single is clearly better than the single.
Yeah. What's one you like? Distance from Human by One Republic?
Distance by One Republic, and like I say, their previous album is really, really good. It's very sonically interesting, and I think they come from it from a very different place, whereas Artificial Paradise is a little bit more like I don't want to say top 40 friendly, but you know what I mean when I say that.
Yeah, it's more on the standard path than off the beaten track. Like Human very much felt like sonic experimentation, and it doesn't matter because like we were saying, a lot of the albums that came out between 2020 and 2022 were just like, well, we weren't going to make this and we can't tour it, so it doesn't really matter. And that's what I think was so interesting about that time. It was almost like people took the sort of the blinds off and they said, right, we'll just do something, whatever we're feeling. And there was no pressure for it to do well. There was no pressure to tour it.
Even though this may be a little bit melodramatic, I also think that a lot of artists will have thought, if this is the last album we'll ever make, what do we want to make?
Well, I think
will have factored into it slightly.
There is a melodramatic aspect to that, but financially, some of the bands may have looked and said, I mean, definitely some of the bands on majors who were on their second to third album, where their album is like, right, if you don't break, we're going to drop you. And they have their album come out in 2021 and they can't support it and they can't tour it. And a lot of people as well, I feel like at that time, even though a lot of people were paying attention because there was nothing better to do, I also feel like it was such a weird time that a lot of people also wasn't really paying attention. They said a lot of people was going back and listening to like their comfort music and their comfort films, wasn't they?
Yeah.
So people were like, I want to escape, so I'm going to start listening to early 2000s or 90s or 70s, whatever it was that was comfortable for them. So these bands and artists were putting out new music like, here's something to entertain you. And a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it was falling on deaf ears. So I do feel very, very sorry for bands on majors where it will have been like, we might get dropped and it's not even our fault, really.
Yeah. But like I say, the album format is tried and tested, but also it's timeless. You know, I do feel like, you know, the way, even if you're looking at it in a digital lens, less than like a physical one, you know, it doesn't really matter because a digital album you can just press on vinyl. Same with a vinyl album, you can just put it on streaming. They are one and the same.
They're the same product, 100%.
So I do think that the only difference is one's on a piece of plastic and one's online. That's the difference. But like I say, it doesn't really matter how you've recorded it, whether it's on tape or whether it's on a computer. It doesn't really matter.
If we circle back to one of the most album-y albums we've ever heard, Daft Punk's Random Access Memories, which arguably came out at the lowest point of vinyl sales, am I correct?
Yeah, 2013 was when it was really dead in the water.
And albums were sort of suffering quite a lot, really, in 2013. Or it was, you know, it very, very much, everything was trending that it's not going to work. Daft Punk's Random Access Memories stands out as, not only, for some reason, it stands out as their defining album, which blows my mind, because if you wasn't sort of paying attention or like alive at the time, Discovery is so massive. The fact that Random Access Memories appears like, at least to most fans, like it has outperformed Discovery to a certain extent.
I definitely think culturally it seemed to do a lot more. Maybe that's because of the striking album cover, with it being the two helmets sort of cut in half.
And also the fact that it was their first release, and it was like a return for Daft Punk, and everybody was like, oh my God, Daft Punk's back, and we didn't know that there was never going to come back again.
I think had Get Lucky not gone so well, it probably wouldn't have had as much fanfare, but because Get Lucky was such a well-received song on radio and commercially, and the album was like a full-blown concept album, and it had the operatic, well, not operatic, sorry, it had the cinematic sort of moments in it, and it was very, it's a very like, I don't want to say it's like Dark Side of the Moon, but it has that kind of energy. It has the traditional concept album energy.
The songs don't work individually, some of them.
Yeah.
Some of them really cannot be removed from that album. They need to be contextually in that album.
And I think the thing is with that sort of mindset is that with the way concept albums went, it's like, oh, well, it can't just be 10 songs. It has to be like, we have to have a big opening, a big finale. We have to have moments that twist, like the theoretical, if you was to try and put a visualizer to it, you have to have moments that change where, say, the audible movie is. And that's where songs like I Can Never put Random Track. Random Access
is it
Memories.
beyond one
it's
of the
beyond
ones?
where it goes into like the drum break.
Yeah,
and
that's beyond, I want to say.
Because there's moments in the album that feel very cinematic in nature. Because you have like orchestral scores. Get Lucky, 1.1 billion plays on YouTube
Million.
Music.
Oh, sorry. Oh, no, yeah, sorry, it's billion. I was looking at Instant Crush. Why is Instant Crush at the top?
I don't know.
Anyway, the fact is that it is outperformed the songs on Discovery, which I very much think is a shock. I wouldn't have thought that going into it.
Yeah, it's Beyond is one of those songs that really comes to mind for me because there's a lot of songs on Random Access Memories. You know, you have Get Lucky, you have Lose Yourself to Dance. Those are the singles. Obviously, it has a really good start with Give Life Back to Music. I think everybody, when they heard them drop the needle on that vinyl on the trailer and you heard the intro for Give Life Back to Music, it was like oh, this is going to be incredible.
I'm actually just got goosebumps thinking about that song. That was such, when I remember we listened to we probably already said this before, we listened to the iTunes full all-in-one version of this album. So you couldn't see what the tracks were, how many tracks there was. It was just all one constant stream. And I remember just being blown away. And really, we'd been into Daft Punk when we were like kids, but then we'd gone really into rock. So Daft Punk for me, it was like coming back to Daft Punk. I wasn't very familiar with them anymore, and it was like almost like a new band again in a certain way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and then obviously you finish the album with Contact. And if you've never listened to Contact, man, Contact is just very dramatic. The full thing, the full package, everything from the track listing, sequencing, the songs, to the album cover, everything is saying this is a masterpiece concept album. Do you know what I mean?
Dare to say that Contact is the best recorded drum performance of all time.
Really? That's a bold statement.
Well, yeah, because a lot of them are like, well, it's Led Zeppelin or it's this song that's just one drum solo, somebody going mental. But Contact is
like 5 full minutes of just epic drumming, and then you have like that outro for a minute.
And the fills, though, like it's all in there, but you've got a steady groove. You've got all these really articulate fills that are very exciting, but also it is like that song is like made way just for the drums. Like the drums are so important in that song.
Yeah.
And you can tell it's a live performance. Like, because the full point about Random Access Memories is that Daft Punk, traditionally an electronic act, they got real session musicians to literally play it. And it wasn't like, oh, we need a drum loop. It was like, we want you to play the song from start to finish in one go and just enjoy it as your craft, like a master of your craft. And that's why the album among audiophiles and like music critics is so like revered, because it's like getting the best people like they could find and saying, just like, do it like you've always wanted to do it. Because there's like really sad stories about like these session musicians being like, all I want to do, like I've dedicated my life to playing drums, and they walk into like a session and they get like a quarter way through the song and like somebody will stop them midway through the take and say, yeah, we got enough. It's like, well, it's a 2-3 minute song. Can't I just finish the performance? And they're like, no, we don't need you to.
Yeah.
So I think that's where there's this emotional resonance on this album.
For anybody who's never recorded drums, recording drums is a very brutal exercise because somebody can literally just walk up to a computer and program what you're about to play faster than you can record it. So it's it's not very fun.
Yeah.
It's a lot worse trying to record drums than it is for recording vocals, because at the end of the day, it's very, very difficult to synthesize somebody's voice one to one, but it's very, very easy to synthesize a acoustic drum kit and say, there you go. So, it's just one of those things. But like I say, that's the thing with the albums, right? Is you have these big moments and these collection of songs. It's almost like a movie. It's as close as music can get to a feature film.
Yeah.
With albums in general. And that's basically why people like albums, and you get songs that you wouldn't hear. If every song had to be a single, you wouldn't get interesting music.
100%.
And people talk about the chart music. You see, always see articles, the chart music's getting dumber and dumber. It's simpler and simpler music. Well, guess where the interesting music is? On the albums, in the deep cuts, because they know, well, the record label only wants 2 or 3 singles, and then I can do what I want for the next 8 songs.
Yeah. And I find almost every pop artist where you listen to the singles and you're like, it's a bit boring or it's a bit whatever, you can listen to the deep cuts on the album and there will be something quite thought-provoking or something sonically quite wild in there, and it always makes me think, man, if these acts were marketed better, you would probably like a lot more of them.
Yeah. And on that note, what's your favourite albums? Do you even listen to albums? Let us know in the polls and the comments and stuff. And thanks for listening, everybody. Peter, do you have a go-to album that is an album's album to shout out before we go?
I feel like I've mentioned a lot of them, but honourable mentions would be Muse. Muse have proper concept albums. So I would say Drones.
Drones is a good shout, and for me, I'm just trying to think. I mean, I don't want to say something cliched like Def Leppard's Hysteria, because that is like a known, really, really good one. But, even just on a more recent thing, Brat by Charlie XCX.
Yeah.
Just because of how conceptual that is. And it is, you think, no, it's not. It's just throwaway pop music, like if you're a rock fan. But you go, listen to the album, it's a lot more conceptual than you'd think.
Yeah.
So, right, on that note, thanks for listening, everybody.